Welcome. This video is about obviously the Crusades that'll happen during the High Middle Ages, or the High Middle Ages. So you want to use your notes and follow along. Please make sure on your note guide that you read and you highlight the first two paragraphs. That gives a good overall viewpoint. All right, setting the stage. First of all, crusade comes from the Latin word cru, meaning a cross, kind of the idea of take up the cross. The Holy Land is the city of Jerusalem, where Jesus had walked, and the areas surrounding Jerusalem that we generally call Palestine. The Crusaders' job was to literally take up the cross of Christ, to take back or recover the Holy Lands from the Muslims. And the Crusades are a series of 9 military expeditions. Most of them are unsuccessful. In fact, all of them are unsuccessful in terms of taking back the Holy Land, except the very first one. The most famous, that very unsuccessful, was a children's crusade. This is where the Pope said that, and many other Christian preachers in Western Europe said that if children are God's most holy creatures, and if they go on crusade, they will be protected by God, and that they will win back the Holy Land. Most of the kids along the way die, and they're also attacked by various, raiders along the way, and they generally don't make it to the Holy Land at all. And finally, when does this occur? Periodically from 1095, when it first starts, the first call to crusade, to 1291 CE. All right. So, leading events, the Muslims have been controlling Jerusalem since the late 600s, when, shortly after the death of Muhammad. Later on, the Seljuk Turks from Central Asia invade and attack the Byzantine Empire. They're also Muslim, and they soon take over Jerusalem. So they're the main controllers of the area. And what starts us all off is the Byzantine Emperor Alexius asks and beseeches Pope Urban II to send help. So why does Pope Urban agree to send the help? There's mainly 3 reasons. One, he wants to extend his own political influence, make himself more powerful as not only a leader of Christianity, but also a secular leader, a kingly, earthly leader as well. Second, he wants to potentially reunite the Roman Catholics with the Eastern Orthodox. If you recall, the Great Schism only happens 40 years before in the Great Schism in 1054. And finally, this is kind of his Christian duty to help save a fellow Christian state as well. And the importance of Jerusalem, remember, it's a holy city to the 3 Abrahamic faiths. For Christians, this is where Jesus was crucified, died, and resurrected. For Jews, this is the city of Zion, God's own city, and the site of Solomon's temple. And for Muslims, it's the 3rd important city in their religious faith, and this is where Muhammad ascends into heaven during his midnight journey. So Jerusalem is a well sought after city for the 3 faiths, and very important to all 3, as you can see. I want you to pause and I want you to read this call. This is a speech that Pope Urban uses to start off the entire crusade. So pause and see if you can pick out the 3 ways in which he beseeches or tells people to fight on crusade. All right, so the first one, he promised immediate remission of sins, or forgiveness of sins. The second one, this is part of your Christian duty to profess the Christian religion. It is part of your duty as a good Christian. And let those who have been fighting against their brothers and relatives, so amongst fellow Christian Europeans, now fight in a proper way against barbarians. So the same idea of, what we saw in Islam, fighting against non-believers instead of fighting against fellow, Muslim, or in this case, Christian brothers. And finally, on this side would be the sorrowful and the poor, on that the rich, on this side the enemies of the Lord, and on that his friends. So if you don't go on this journey, you don't have to worry about paying money for your expenses. God is on your side, very similar to some of the previous calls to religious warfare that we've seen before. All right, so finally, motivations for Crusaders. For knights, this is the opportunity to use their fighting skills. By now, the fighting against Germanic tribes and the warring that you see has started to decline, so they're just sitting around here doing nothing. For peasants, this is the opportunity to gain freedom from their feudal bonds, to, become a free man instead of a serf. And for all, the Pope promises instant salvation if you are killed fighting against the Muslims, or often called the Saracens, during this time period, the opportunity for adventure and possibly gaining a lot of wealth. So 3 important reasons. All right, so this is a horrible histories video. It's a short one about the Crusades. You want to pause here and click the link that appears so you get that, and then you can continue on. So the First Crusade happens from 1096 to 1099. They start, as you can see on the map, they start from various places in France, and they travel via land, so across Central Europe and down through Italy, and they meet at Constantinople, and then they cross Turkey and travel down, and they actually end up capturing Jerusalem in 1099. And some of the Crusaders decide to stay, and they actually establish the Christian kingdoms, some Crusader states, and establish Palestine. So they establish the kingdom of Jerusalem, of Antioch, and Edessa as well. The Second Crusade happens from 1147 to 1149. So during this time period between the First and the Second Crusades, the Jerusalem and fellow Crusader states are still there. However, by the Second Crusade, the Seljuk Turks take back some of those states, specifically Damascus and Acre, which is very, very close to Jerusalem. And so again, there's another call to crusade. They start in eastern France, western Germany, and they cross through Constantinople, a kind of a gathering place, and then they attack. They try to attack and recover those states, however, they do fail. So the Second Crusade is a failure. The Third Crusade is probably the most important. The Third Crusade is often called the King's Crusade because there's 3 important kings that actually lead the crusade. It starts in 1189 to 1192. And the real problem is you have a new Muslim leader, or sometimes when you're reading primary literature, the Europeans called the Muslims in the Holy Land the Saracens. And there's a new leader called Saladin. Saladin united the Muslims and united the Muslim army, and he finally takes the city of Jerusalem back in 1187. So now we have a new call to crusade to take Jerusalem back from Saladin, and that's led by 3 kings. The first one being Richard I, or Richard the Lionhearted of England. He was the brother of King John, if you recall. Second, Frederick the Barbarossa. He's king of the Holy Roman Empire of, this would be Central Europe, so Germany, Austria, Hungary, that area. And finally, the king of Spain, named Philip II Auguste. So these 3 guys, they help lead the crusade, and they travel to the Holy Land. They fight. However, it's kind of Saladin is able to keep off and not allow the Christians to win. Saladin and Richard I negotiate a truce. And this truce says that Saladin gets to keep the city, yet he allows the pilgrims to access the Holy Land site. So in Jerusalem, they can go visit the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. That's supposedly where Jesus was buried and resurrected. So that is an important truce. So make sure you know that, it ends in a truce. The Christians don't actually win back the city, but they do have access to it. And here you want to pause this video. This is a short, funny one about Saladin's plan and how he plans to take back the city of Jerusalem and attack it. So pause the video so you can watch that. And then there's finally the Fourth Crusade. That happens from 1199 to 1204. And what's important about the Fourth Crusade is they don't actually even get to Jerusalem at all. Prior knowledge to this, the city-state of Venice was a very important meeting place and a very wealthy stop for Christian crusaders. And they had a lot of ties to the merchants in Constantinople. And the merchants in Constantinople had owed a lot of debts. They owed a lot of money to Venice. So a lot of the crusaders who go on crusade were very poor, and they couldn't afford to actually pay to travel along the ships that they go on the way to the Holy Land, and they stop in Constantinople. So they secretly agreed with the Venetian government that they would sack the city of Constantinople. And so they raid the city, they take the riches, and they don't even make it to Jerusalem because they just end up going back to Venice. But this is an important date because it shows the spreading and the deepening division between the Roman Catholic Church and Constantinople. Really the divide and the schism that we're not going to be able to repair this relationship. So finally, some effects of the crusade, very important. Feudalism as a political and social system starts to break down, and the kings gain more and more authority. Second, the Pope and the authority of the nobles start to weaken because the secular kings of England, France, etc., start to gain more power. There's increasingly bitterness amongst Muslims, Christians, and Jews. Obvious one, especially after the Fourth Crusade, the Byzantine Empire really weakens. I would emphasize this is after the Fourth Crusade. And finally, maybe a little more positive one is that interactions lead to increasing trading networks being established between the Eastern and Western Europe, particularly in bringing back a lot of the inventions of the Islamic empires and a lot of trading goods with China and India. And that's actually what you're going to be looking at in your picture tour. You want to note the products below. And then finally, you can watch this final horrible history video about a crusader that comes home. What did he bring back? And you want to note those as well. All right, guys, that's it. Thanks for listening. Hope you have a good day.